Sofoklis Schortsanitis averaged 8.4 points per game during his EuroLeague career. Yet, in this clip, two defenders are already on him, and two more are collapsing before he can even get a clean look at the rim. Of course, it makes sense that with him being directly under the rim, more defenders would come in to help. But the speed in which they collapse tells you more about his impact than that 8.4 points per game ever would. Greece already had its own freak, and if you only know basketball through the NBA, you probably missed him completely. Sofoklis Schortsanitis, better known as Big Sofo, was a roughly 6'10", 350-pound tank who moved far better than someone that size should have ever been able to move. That combination eventually placed him at the center of one of international basketball's greatest upsets and gave a young Giannis Antetokounmpo an example he would remember for the rest of his life. Now again, if you were to look at his stats on Basketball Reference, you might miss the entire story behind him. This is exactly why I made the Across the Globe series in the first place. Some players were never going to become part of the American sports media machine that is the NBA, but they are absolute monsters in their own basketball world. The NBA is its own beast, where box scores and narratives usually decide who gets remembered, but Across the Globe is for the names and teams that meant everything in their own country and still get underrated here because the stats don't tell the full story. Big Sofo was one of those guys. What made Sofo so great was even though he was called Baby Shaq and was over 300 pounds, he actually had far more fluid motion. Of course, he wasn't moving like a guard and pushing the ball up the floor the same way other unicorn centers can, but instead he had short, explosive burst which was still enough to set him apart. He was able to set a screen and pick and roll faster than most defenders, and he could clear large gaps without taking it so many steps to get there. Sofo's size also got him into advantageous positions, but his coordination allowed him to actually take advantage of those positions, which is why he commands that sort of pressure in the paint that we saw in the beginning. He could establish himself and quickly get a shot off where most centers take a second to gather the ball or gather themselves when near the rim. That's why as soon as Sofo has the ball near the basket, so many people collide because he could get the shot off immediately. And I think that's where people may make the mistake of hearing underrated and assuming that I'm about to argue that Big Sofo was secretly one of the greatest centers ever. He was not. His conditioning limited his minutes, and there were still moments where he could be exposed defensively, especially when teams forced him away from the paint. He was not a dominant rebounder or rim protector, especially for his position, and there were matchups where keeping him on the floor became difficult. But being limited is not the same thing as being ineffective. He was effective in his job of creating offense around the rim and forcing defenses to collapse, and scoring against multiple defenders and creating opportunities outside the rim when those people did collide in on him. That is why the Baby Shaq nickname stuck. But honestly, again, even that comparison can make people think the wrong thing. Shaq was an all-time NBA Hall of Famer. Sofo was a different kind of problem. In FIBA basketball, the floor is smaller, the possessions are more physical, and teams spend more time in structured half-court actions. That is exactly the environment where a player like Sofo becomes brutal to deal with, especially with FIBA rules only being 5 fouls compared to the NBA's 6. Sofo created opportunities by just being an obstacle. Sofo made nearly 60% of his 2-point attempts during his EuroLeague career. He also drew 3.7 fouls per game despite playing fewer than 15 minutes. That means he was drawing roughly 1 foul for every 4 minutes he spent on the court, meaning opposing bigs could not spend the entire game wrestling with him without risking foul trouble. Although he was a large unit, he wasn't a full steamroll type playstyle. Again, although he's nicknamed Baby Shaq, Shaq was great in the NBA because it's like somebody dropped a prime NFL linebacker in a different sport, or like someone equipped with the Pain Train perk from Fallout, while Sofo instead had good hands and controlled his body well through contact and could put enough touch on the ball to guide it off the glass from awkward angles. Sofo wasn't exactly a scalpel still with his size, but he was still more capable of precision than the chainsaw of Shaq. That type of play brings us towards the 2006 World Cup, in a matchup that ended up perfectly complementing his style. Team USA had a lot of names on paper: LeBron, D-Wade, Melo, Chris Paul, Dwight Howard, and a lot of the star power and all of the athleticism and all of the expectations going in. The roster was supposed to run through everybody. But just like we discussed with the box score, numbers don't tell the full story. FIBA games are instead not won on paper, and Greece did what great international teams do, and they turned the game into a half-court problem. Greece knew that if they went out and played America's way, they would lose. So instead they did the opposite and forced the US to play Greece's way, which made the US have to play defense in a much different style, having to compete with more physicality, but also discipline within that physicality. Sofo would go towards the paint, which, just like the clip before, would force defenders towards the center, but doing so left others open for opportunities, and even with the US aware of it, there was still nothing they could do against it. By being more physical, he demanded the same from the US as well, who began fouling under. Dwight Howard later said they ran the same play the entire second half, and Sofo was still getting in the paint anyway. He finished with 14 points in only 17 minutes while shooting 6 for 7 from the field. Greece made it a statement game that basketball was no longer an American-only sport, and that other play styles existed, helping fuel the fire even further for the 2008 Redeem team after their previous Olympic failures, which further adds to the original point to across the globe. For many, this is a 20-year-old international game that hardly is remembered. But for the outside world, this is a memorable game where Greece made history and helped break the illusion of America having a basketball monopoly. For more on how basketball spread across the world as well, you can check out this video here. 3 years later, Greece played Slovenia for bronze at EuroBasket 2009. Greece scored only 57 points in the entire game, while Sofo scored 23 of them coming off of the bench. Slovenia fouled him 12 times trying to contain him, and Greece won by 1 point. FIBA described it as arguably the best game that Sofo ever played in a Greek uniform. And those games from 2006 to 2009 inspired a 14-year-old kid in the same country, showing the pride and success someone can have in their country, setting that kid on a trajectory for eventually Finals MVP in the NBA. That kid being Giannis Antetokounmpo, along with his brothers who would also become champions. Giannis became the face of Greek basketball to the world, but Big Sofo was one of the monsters that helped define what Greek basketball already felt like from the inside. Sofo helped mentor Giannis even though they had different body types. As Giannis said, "When I saw Sofo playing, a black kid for the Greek national team, that gave me motivation and a dream to be in the team." As time went on, Giannis would become more of a full NBA prospect and trained with Kobe as he became more legitimate in the NBA market.
Like I remember 2009, 2010, when we were like waking up to watch the under 20. And back then, you remember Nikos Papas, Kostas Papadopoulos, all of those players, and they were winning. I think they beat the USA team also. And look at the NASA, said maybe one day, if we're fortunate enough and we work hard, that we can play in the national team. And Thanas had the opportunity to play when he was younger. He went and was practicing with them. So always when I saw him, he came back with the national team gear. I was like, man, maybe one day like I can be part of this, like represent my country. You know, obviously it's not like going to war, but in our head, playing basketball for our country is almost like going to war, right? So I started playing for them, and I was 2013, and I've played in 9 tournaments and always wanted to win a medal for them. And 9 tournaments later, me, my brother Thanasi, and my brother Kostas were able to accomplish together.
And so just like everything else in this video, Sofo gets forgotten and overshadowed. And when people bring up Giannis's mentors, they instead remember Kobe and others. That quote from Giannis is really the whole point. Before Kobe was the global mentor people remember, Sofo was the local proof that this was even possible. Sofo may not have been as integral to directly training Giannis, and he did not teach him ways to play, as their games were nothing alike. But instead, Giannis saw another black player wearing grease across his chest, representing the country on one of basketball's biggest stages, and becoming part of one of the greatest wins in country's history. He did not have to play like Sofo to look at him and understand that maybe there could eventually be room for him too. Stats can tell you that Sofo only averaged 8.4 points, but it doesn't tell you the story behind everything. While Sofo did not directly train Giannis and teach him his style of Shaq-type play, it created the butterfly effect to create an amazing superstar power forward and finals MVP in the NBA today. Which again brings us to the point of Across the Globe on my channel. If a player never becomes an NBA star, American basketball discussion often treats his career like an unfinished sentence. Everything he accomplished elsewhere becomes background information, leading towards the only question people apparently care about. Why didn't he play in the NBA? But Sofo's career isn't a simple footnote in the world of basketball. He played meaningful basketball in front of fans who cared about those teams, represented a country that remembers what he did, and became important enough that one of the greatest players ever still remembered watching him as a child. He may not have a legacy like Hakeem in terms of international greatness, but it's still a story worth sharing in this video. So who is the player that you remember as a legend, but NBA fans would probably reduce to one stat page or one random highlight? Drop your names in the comments because those are the players that I want to cover. The players whose stories go far beyond their stats. And let me know if you knew who Sofo was before this video. For more players that maybe don't deserve the treatment that history has given them, you can also check out my Give Them Roses series, diving into more players that are either underrated or mistreated by narratives, such as this Ricky Rubio video on screen discussing how battling mental health in the NBA media destroyed a promising career. With all that said, I'll see y'all over in that video.